In this video, I'd like to explore something called a cyclical maladaptive pattern. These are those patterns that show up in our relationships and become unintentionally reinforcing in regards to those beliefs that we would rather not have about ourselves or the world around us. Those experiences of feeling unlovable, not good enough, like a failure, the anticipation of rejection. These are these underlying core self-beliefs that tend to frame our mind and our body and the way we navigate our world in moments of stress, anxiety, depression, and so many other painful emotional experiences. We've been talking a lot about how each moment in the present is defined by 90% of our past. Now, that's really critical to keep in mind because remember, our amygdala has little memory centers. And Amy is our fiercest warrior maternal protector. She has our best interests at heart, and she remembers all the difficult things. That being said, we are hardwired to want to be in deep, safe connection with other people. Think about an infant when it's born and how vulnerable it is. An infant's secure attachment and healthy developmental trajectory relies upon loving, safe others. And if we don't have that as we're growing up, our brain starts to design and devise ways to manifest feelings of safety or security and, a way to survive. So we all have underlying expectations and desires for what we want to have happen. But when the amygdala gets involved, then that can start to play a role in how we anticipate or expect that other people will be treating us. We start telling stories. We've been talking a lot about those choose your own adventure experiences of doom that our amygdala loves to spin for us. And if you haven't watched the Healing Your Fear Brain series, I highly recommend it. It will take you into a deep dive in the amygdala. But for our purposes right now, we are meaning-making creatures. We are narrative-based. And if our brain has ever been taught or shown and our amygdala has encoded experiences about the self and the self-value in the world around us, we're unsafe, world is dangerous, we're unlovable, we're not good enough, all those core constructs, then we will start to create a framework through which we expect that people will treat us in the manner that we have learned in which we see our own meaning. So what that ultimately results on is our interpretation of other people's actions and behaviors becomes impacted and framed by our expectations of how people will treat us. And that's usually tied to this 90% of the past. So if our caregivers taught us that we weren't good enough, if our caregivers taught us that we were only worthy if we were perfect, then all of a sudden here, 20, 30, 40 years later, we're putting that same stamp on the expectations that we have of anybody in our world. So think about if you've had a moment where somebody's interacted with you and you started to feel an old pull of a less than preferable self-consideration. An interaction, and you started to think that person's judging me. That person doesn't like me. I can't trust that person. That person's going to betray me. Those are wonderful opportunities to step back and look at, is there a pattern from the past that is running itself right into your present moment? Because what happens is we start to create a self-fulfilling prophecy about our expectations and anticipations for how others will treat us. This is that cyclical maladaptive pattern. If we believe we will be rejected, we create the experience of rejection. If we believe we are unlovable, we will create the experience of being unlovable. If you've ever had an experience of thinking that person's going to hurt me, so I'm going to shut myself out and disconnect from them, and then you wind up feeling hurt, that's exactly what I'm talking about. If you've ever not been your best self in a presentation because you're already anticipating failure. I remember a patient just the other day who tied one on the night before a huge presentation and then showed up on Zoom or pandemic time for the presentation and tanked. She self-sabotaged because her 90% of the past was saying, I'm going to fail anyways. And then her brain created a reason for the inevitable failure, when in truth, she could have been amazing. These are those experiences that we're looking at here in these patterns. And they have homes early on in our childhoods and our developmental experiences. We have but one brain, and this brain travels with us everywhere we go. So I'd like to invite you to take a moment and start noticing behavioral patterns that are getting in your way of being your best self. Again, always invite in self-compassion. And in the next video, we'll do some guided work to see if we can find that early self who is learning a way of being that isn't working for you right now, and welcome in some self-compassion so we can take care of that young self. Between now and then, take a moment, start looking at your patterns. Great opportunities to examine are if you've ever gotten repeated feedback from multiple people about the same behavior. Even if you're going, I don't do that, doesn't matter. If multiple people are telling you that something's happening, you are the common denominator. Therefore, that's worth taking a look at. So take a look inside, be curious, lean in. That's the opportunity of growth. And yes, growth can be challenging, and goodness gracious, it is so amazingly rewarding. I'll see you soon.